Good day to everyone, and welcome to the seminar, Talking Trash, Behind the Tobacco Industry's Green Public Relations. This seminar is brought to you by WHO, the FCTC, and the Stop Alliance. My name is Armando Peruga, and I will be your moderator today. Before we start, I have a few announcements to make. The seminar will have two roundtables. We have an excellent panel of speakers that will talk about the destructive environmental practices of the tobacco industry, how they are covering their tracks, the industry obviously, and what we can do about it. I will not describe the many accomplishments of the panelists. You can go to the WHO website to read their bios. Also important, they will speak in English. However, you can listen to them in Arabic, French, Russian, or Spanish using the appropriate Zoom channels. In the lower corner of your screen, you have a kind of a globe that says interpretation. You can select the language you want to hear the speakers. As I said, they will speak in English, but you can listen to the simultaneous translation in one of the four languages I mentioned. I will repeat this now in Spanish and French for those who don't understand from the beginning. Los panelistas hablarán en inglés, pero pueden escucharlos en árabe, francés, ruso, español, seleccionando el canal adecuado de Zoom. In French, les panélistes parleront en anglais, mais vous pourrez les entendre en arabe, français, russe ou espagnol en sélectionnant le canal Zoom approprié. Now, back to English. During the roundtables, you can pose your questions by writing them into the Q&A feature of Zoom. Please use this only for your questions. Use the chat if you want to interchange your opinions, but for the questions, only the Q&A feature. I will transmit the questions to the panelists at the end of each roundtable. Without further delay, the director of the Department of Health Promotion at WHO, Dr. Rudiger Krech, will welcome you and give context to today's seminar's topics. Dr. Krech, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Armando, and very warm welcome, everyone, colleagues and friends around the world, to our first 2022 World No Tobacco Day webinar, together with our colleagues and friends at the Secretariat of the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control and our partners in the STOP partnership. And thank you all for joining. The theme of this year's campaign for World No Tobacco Day is Tobacco, Threat to Our Environment, and brings awareness to the immense environmental damage caused by tobacco through its life cycle, from cultivation, production, distribution, consumption, and tobacco product waste. Thus far, the environmental degradation and associated health risks caused by the tobacco industry has received relatively little attention from researchers and policymakers compared to other areas of tobacco control. In fact, tobacco is not just poisoning people. It is poisoning our planet too. Globally, tobacco product waste is actually the most prevalent of all collected waste and litter, and includes cigarette butts, nicotine pouches, and batteries and metals from electronic devices, which all contain hazardous chemicals and microplastics ending up in our streets, rivers, and beaches. As an example, researchers have found partially digested cigarette butts in 70% of seabirds and 30% of sea turtles that they had sampled. Shockingly, about 4.5 trillion cigarette butts are improperly discarded each year worldwide, making them one of the most littered items on Earth. When looking at tobacco farming and production, the environmental degradation in terms of water depletion, soil contamination, and deforestation is vast and growing. Every year, 22 billion tons of water is used in tobacco production, equivalent to the amount of water discharged by the Amazon River in a day. In addition, tobacco farming accounts for 5% of total deforestation in the world. Now, let me set the scene. Today's webinar on the tobacco industry's greenwashing tactics will expose the various ways the tobacco industry is impacting the environment and trying to cover up their harmful practices through cynical marketing campaigns of novel products and corporate social responsibility schemes. They do so as an attempt to portray themselves as a sustainable and eco-friendly industry, but this couldn't be further from the truth. Some examples include deceptive marketing campaigns of tobacco and nicotine products as healthier options compared to conventional cigarettes, and funding of environmental and humanitarian projects in tobacco-growing countries. Today, we will hear from experts from different regions of the world on concrete examples of the magnitude of the tobacco industry's environmentally footprint and tactics used to strategically greenwash their reputation. Our speakers will also highlight case studies of policies and practices to restrict these efforts, such as effective policy interventions and what we can do together as a global community to address and mitigate the problem by exposing their destructive practices. I look forward to hearing from our speakers and our audience watching this webinar, and with this, I hand back over to you, Amanda.
Thank you, Dr. Craig. I think the figures you provided are impressive and somehow even unexpected for someone like me that's been working on tobacco control for a while. It's also important to highlight that this year marks 50 years since the 1972 United Nations Conference on the Human Environment, widely seen as the first international meeting on the environment. It was also where poverty alleviation and environmental protection became linked, paving the way for the Sustainable Development Goals. So let's start. So this year's topic of the World No Tobacco Day seems very momentous. And let's start with the first roundtable. Dr. Maria Neira, you are the director of the Department of Environmental and Public Health at WHO. You are recognized as one of the influential voices in climate policy, constantly raising awareness on health, environment, and climate. Why would you say is the intersection of public health and the environment so important from your point of view?
Thank you, Armando, and hello, everyone. What a pleasure to be with you. I think we can join forces here and make this even more motivating for people. First, to stop smoking, and second, to stop pollution. Armando, you're right. I mean, the connections between the ecosystems, our environment, and our health are strongly, very, very clear and very strong. I mean, we have more than 20% of the global burden of diseases, which is linked to environmental risk factors. So imagine 1/4 of the mortality around the world could be prevented if we were more friendly with our environment, if we stop it to destroy nature, to destroy the environment, which is the one that are providing us water, food, and the air we breathe. So keeping that in mind, we promote always a zero pollution. We need to stop polluting whatever we touch as humans. We pollute the food by using pesticides, by deforesting. We pollute the water we drink by putting chemicals there and plastics. And we pollute the air we breathe by smoking, by burning fossil fuels. So for us, no health if we do not stop pollution. So I will call it zero pollution 100 health. And therefore, whatever tobacco is already doing so bad for our health, if you add the damage it is doing to the environment, I think we need to, an additional reason why we need to stop using, consuming, and producing tobacco. Over.
Thank you, Dr. Nader. Just a question. This is only a personal interest of mine. I wonder if you can expand a little bit about the health consequences of climate change. It's not necessarily on topic, but I wonder if you could add something to that. I know it's your favorite theme, but I think it's very important.
Yeah, wrong question, Armando, because I love it. Yes, I love this question, but I think you are right. I mean, what is climate change about? It's about putting at risk the basis of our health. It will be creating higher temperatures where some vectors like mosquitoes will be able to transmit diseases like malaria or dengue, which are already causing big problems. It's about creating the natural disasters will have a concrete and very direct impact on our health. It's about putting at risk the shelter and forcing people to migrate, creating situations where the killing diseases like diarrhea, malaria, and malnutrition because of those environmental and global warming, all of the basis of our health. So clearly destroying and not looking at the environment and keeping, adding on the causes of climate change, destroying the environment is very, very bad for our health. On the contrary, if we tackle the causes of climate change, the benefits for our health will be enormous.
If I heard you correctly, you said that about 20% of the health burden is attributed to environmental causes. I wonder if you can expand that figure.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. Actually, it represents almost 13 million deaths that could be avoided if we reduce those environmental risk factors that can be modified. So we are not talking about something impossible. At the contrary, those risk factors can be modified. Which risk factors are we talking about? Air pollution. Air pollution is killing 7 million every year, 7 million premature deaths every year linked to air pollution. Then lack of access to safe water, lack of sanitation, lack of hygiene, use of chemicals that are harmful for our health, exposure to radiation, occupational risk factors, and of course, climate change exacerbating, creating an exacerbation of all of those environmental risk factors. So there is no choice. It's not or the planet or the humans. We need to save the planet to save the humans. Otherwise, the planet will survive without us very well, but we will suffer and the conditions will not compatible with human life.
Thank you, Dr. Nader. I think this helps very much to put into context the topic of today, which is specifically about the greenwashing by the tobacco industry, but it is very, very helpful to have the broader context of environmental health and public health that you provided. So thank you very much. And I wonder, Dr. Blanco, you have been the head of the FCTC Secretariat for the last 3 years. And the objective of this convention is to protect present and future generations from the devastating consequences of tobacco consumption. And among those consequences, health, obviously, that's something that goes without saying, at least for us, but it also mentions social, environmental, and economic. What are those environmental consequences? We have the big picture provided by Dr. Nader, but I wonder if you could provide a more specific picture of what are the environmental consequences of the tobacco consumption and the tobacco industry.
Thank you very much, Armando. And yes, it's not easy to add after Rudiger and Maria have spoken, but I can, let's say, focus a little more in what is specifically the tobacco impact in the environment. And really, we need to understand that the tobacco industry supply chain is global and is big. And it's very funny because today, or funny in a very subtle way, today I was reading that one of the big tobacco industries in the world was granted for second time the award of climate leader. And it was very funny because it's nice to see how they declare their emissions and things. And of course, they don't declare the part of the supply chain. So it's very, very difficult to understand the way that the people who award them that is not seeing the big picture, let's say, beyond the numbers that they provide. But well, that is only an anecdote. But think, for example, we know that arable land is not in a high supply in the world, and we know that the world needs food, and we see each day the problems of famines in developing countries, and we need to see that usually the cultivation is concentrated in developing countries. If you look at the 10 top producers of tobacco, 9 of them are developing, and 4 of them are countries that really are in a situation of food deficit. So how much that good arable land could be used for that instead of ending useless, because you know that tobacco imposes a lot of stress on the land, and usually after some years of use, you cannot use it for any meaningful cultivation. Then we have the water, and we know how much, and year after year, the problem with water is being worse and worse. And usually a year, the waste of water due to tobacco cultivation and farming and production is 22,000 million tons of water that I have read somewhere that is about 2.5 times the total water supply of the UK, for example. So just to put some dimension to number that sometimes is difficult to grasp the idea. And you know that they produce in total every year the equivalent of 84 million tons of CO2. And this is similar or even bigger than the total amount of emission of some small and medium countries, okay? So really, we are not talking as a small contribution to the problem. We are talking with a very, very substantive contribution. On top of that, we have the toxicity, even by the use of fertilizer and pesticides, or either by the improper disposal of the filters that carry with them all the toxics that are contained on them. And they are not only toxic for us, they are toxic also for the environment and for the other fellows users of the environment, like the animals in the sea, the animals in the land. So that is very concerning. It's just to put a little similarities of the numbers. Yeah.
So the consequences are serious. What does the treaty say about protecting from these consequences? Because protecting from the health consequences comes as a given, but how about the environmental consequences?
Well, there is one article that specifically addresses this. It's Article 18 of the FCTC, and it says that parties, when carrying their obligations of the putting into place the measures of the convention, they should give due regard to the protection of the environment and the health of persons in relation to the environment, in relation with the tobacco cultivation and manufacture in their respective territories. So there is a specific mandate in the convention to pay due respect to the problems of the environment. Of course, the whole convention in itself is going to help, because the whole convention tried to decrease the consumption of the product. And also there is another article, that is Article 17, and these two articles are not the most well-known, let's say, of the convention, that calls for substitution of these crops. People stop producing tobacco, because not only because of the environment and because of the health, because also the people who work in tobacco is in a very bad situation. Usually they are getting a very marginal profit of what they do, with a lot of intensive work, and for example, a lot of work of child labor. And we know that the ILO is having next week a conference of child labor, and I hope that due attention is paid to this area too during that activity. Well,
thank you very much, Dr. Blanco. Now we have the context provided by Dr. Neira, we have the more specifics of the problem and potential solutions at least at the legal level of the treaty. I would like to ask now, Mr. Rowell, the destructive environmental practices of the tobacco industry are clear, but how are they covering their tracks? Because this is part of the topic today, not only the damage they do, but also it seems that they are very able at covering their tracks. You are a senior research fellow at the Tobacco Control Research Group at the University of Bath. Perhaps you could explain the concept of greenwashing and give us a few examples.
Okay, great. Thank you. I mean, greenwashing is basically where a company or an industry tries to portray itself as environmentally friendly, where in fact it's actually completely the opposite. And what we're seeing at the moment is, the tobacco industry is trying to tell you that it's changing. It's trying to, argue that it's becoming sustainable, it's becoming green. All you've got to do is look at their websites or their annual reports, and there's pages of where they're bragging about them being sustainable. BAT says it's been 20 years in the sustainability index run by Dow Jones.
And I guess you don't trust them.
Well, I mean, I think we need to sort of take a step back. And basically my message is very simple. Do not believe the spin, do not believe the hype. This is an industry that is uniquely dangerous. We've known for a long time that it's, killing 1 and 2 of its long-term users. But as other speakers have said, we've often forgotten that it's also killing the planet. At every step of the way, there is, from farming all the way to cigarette butts, it's got an ecological impact. And this, we've heard some of those statistics, but 80 million tons of CO2 equivalent, and that is the sort of roughly equivalent of one of the the large oil companies. And we're often talking about big oil causing climate change, but we do not talk about the oil about the tobacco industry as a cause of climate change. And the other thing I think we need to realize is and we've heard about cigarette butts and 4.5 trillion cigarette butts being discarded and littering the earth. But I mean, the industry is also moving to new products. And a lot of these new products, they've got batteries, they're single-use plastics. And so we're going to have a whole new generation of waste that is going to be, highly dangerous, high impact on the environment, and will, exacerbate climate change.
Well, I'm interested in this last part of you mentioned of the new products. What products are you referring to specifically?
So, I mean, for example, like you've got e-cigarettes, you've got heated tobacco products, you've got nicotine pouches, e-cigarettes, and
what kind of waste do they produce?
Well, if you think about it, if you unpick a heated tobacco product or an e-cigarette, they're made of plastic. They've got batteries. We read a lot about the problems with battery from mining to disposal. You've got batteries going into landfill and leaching, toxic chemicals. You've got batteries setting fire to some landfills, and rare minerals, single use, and disposal. And all of those plastics and batteries need energy to produce, and again, will exacerbate climate change. So instead of trying to get their consumers to quit tobacco, BAT actually talks about trying to addict new generations of consumers to these potentially ecological, these products that have got a huge ecological harm.
And do they also provide for themselves some greenwashing about this footprint that they leave in the environment?
Yeah, exactly. They are trying to argue that these new products are actually, they're greener, they're safer. This is all about a wonderful green, fluffy transition that the industry is happening right now. And that, my simple message is: do not believe the greenwashing, do not believe the spin, because this is a uniquely dangerous industry, not only killing its long-term consumers, but also killing the planet.
So either it's old version or the new version, there's an environmental impact of the tobacco and the nicotine industries.
Absolutely. You know, cigarettes have problems, and it's the new products also have serious problems too.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mr. Rowell. Let me finish this first roundtable, and we have with us Mr. Kevin Kenga. Mr. Genga, you have been working in Kenya on the environmental consequences of tobacco farming, if I'm correct. Can you tell us about the environmental degradation and health risks caused by tobacco farming? I believe you've been working in the Migori country and the changes you've seen over time as someone that has really practical hands-on experience on this topic. Mr. Genga.
Thank you so much, Armando. Decades ago, most of counties in Migori County used to be wetlands, and we could do agricultural activities without worrying of any chemicals or using only fertilizers. We could graze our animals and drink them from the rivers without worrying of them being exposed to intoxication. But unfortunately, when the tobacco industries came in the early 1970s or 1960s, recruiting humorous number of farmers to work on the tobacco agricultural ventures. Trees were cut down, forests were cleared. A lot of trees were used, a lot of trees were cut down to be used as fuel. These lands were being used to do the agricultural activities. Our farm soils depleted and degraded. Our rivers dried up, environment polluted.
Does it have an impact on the livelihood of these farmers?
Yes. The impact of the livelihood of this farm is that when there's that too much use of chemicals on the soils, there's that aspect of degradation. These farms cannot be used for any other agricultural activity unless they are given the fertilizer, which is not the case that tobacco industries are advocating for. Another thing, there are also the health risks that came along with it. These farmers are not being given the personal protective equipment by the tobacco industries. They're being exposed to diseases like the green tobacco sickness. They're being exposed to diseases like the upper respiratory tract and lower respiratory tract infections. Working in these farms.
Okay. I guess this has been, you have seen this with your own eyes develop in front of you.
Yes.
And have you seen also some what we call greenwashing practices by the industry? How they have, do they blame themselves for all this or they blame others?
Tobacco industries are coming up doing medical camps, let's say like screening cancers, yet they are still advocating for tobacco farming activities by these farmers. They are giving farmers tree seedlings at a very expensive, exorbitant prices, not supervising whether the trees have been planted. At the same time, encouraging the farmers not to plant, not to allow trees to grow around the tobacco plantations. They are providing PPEs in households which are not adequate. You find that a household of 5 farmers, only a pair of PPEs being given. These PPEs, you find that a kid has worn the mask, the father has worn the gloves, the mother has worn the gumboots. They are all exposed. They are providing alternative means of fuel for curing at a very expensive prices, which are not also adequate. Forcing the farmers to go back, the tobacco farmers to go back and cut down the trees that they have not planted, that the tobacco industries have not supervised whether they have been planted. These are things that are happening and we need to stop them.
Okay.
Tobacco.
Yeah, go ahead.
Tobacco industries are trying to bind the farmers into some of the lucrative binding agreement. You find that they have got loose resource options the farmers would run to when they have some small hitches. This binds them to long tobacco agricultural contracts that will make them not to run away from, even if they want to, because they're indebted to the tobacco farmers. They cannot run away from it, even if they are willing, making the environmental depletion and degradation to be so high in these farms.
Well, Mr. Genga, I see you are a very devoted person, passionate about your work. And I want to expand a little bit about how is your work, your personal work and the groups that you represent contributing to countering these tactics.
Yeah, my work is majorly on, I'm educating the farmers on alternative means of farming that is less harmful to the environment, a farming practice that will give them food that is nutritious to the health, farming that will not deplete the environment, a farming that whose wastes will not be discarded to pollute the environment, but would be used even as food for animals that are safe and not causing harms like tobacco is doing. I am promoting reforestation activities so that we reclaim the glory of the lands that we had before when tobacco came. I am promoting responsibility, promoting the use to be responsible for the future environment so that we leave a planet that is safe for our future generation, that is safe for everyone, even us, that is safe for all of us without any harm that tobacco is doing to the environment.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Genga. This has been very illustrative. I would like to open the floor now we are at the end of this first round table and we have many questions. And I'm sure we're not going to have time. We only have 5 minutes, but let me select some of these questions if I can read the questions I have here. Let's start with a question from Jenny Ravello to Andy Roll. She says, you spoke of tobacco companies bragging about being or working on sustainability. In the report, there's a mention of tobacco companies being A-listed on the work of climate change by international charities. Have you called out these organizations doing these awards ranking, that the rankings they're given are deceiving and being used by tobacco companies to promote their image? Andy, would you have something?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, this is part of what we're doing, today in and also in the brief. We are calling out. We haven't specifically challenged, some of those ratings or organizations before today, but today we are highlighting this massive discrepancy of tobacco companies being called climate leaders or sustainability leaders, and saying yes, there's a legitimate case to answer as to what is going on. Often these ratings agencies don't look at the core product. Often companies can self-report. There's no oversight, and I think you've got about 600 different types of sort of ratings globally on ESG. So today is part of that conversation where we are raising awareness that all this narrative needs to be challenged.
Very good, thanks. I have another question from Laurent Hubert, and the question goes as follows. It doesn't say to whom, so anyone can jump to these. It says, given that tobacco is responsible for 5% of deforestation, does anyone knows if tobacco is being addressed this week during the COP15 of the United Nations Convention to combat desertification that is taking place this week? Anyone knows anything about this specific COP15 of the UNCCD?
Yeah, thanks, Armando. I think I can answer. I can at least participate on this one, on the response. Yes, the COP15 will be this year the big conference, and it's about biodiversity and how we need to protect that biodiversity. And this week, that's the conference on biodiversity and health. And this week it was the combat to desertification. I don't think tobacco had a very important role there, but obviously it's something that has to be addressed. I think it's a question of understanding the whole picture, that is not just the greenhouse gases, and therefore the whole it is contribute to climate change, is the contribution to deforestation, the contribution of environmental pollution in many places, water, the intensified use of pesticides, diverting the production of food, as well said by our panelists, and all of this damage. And we need to be conscious that greenwashing is a kind of saying, okay, I'm doing you harm, but don't worry, I'm not using plastic, I'm using recycled paper, and therefore it's environmentally friendly. It's not that. You need to stop doing harm at the beginning and not just justifying that you are environmentally friendly, which is something that everybody's trying to do these days.
Thank you, Dr. Neira. I have a question from Kathy Watson about the waste from electronic cigarettes. I think we already talked about that. So given the time we have, I'll go to the next question from Vansa Misoramath from India. And he or she, I'm not sure, says, is it correct to say that after cultivating tobacco, soil will not be fit to grow any other crop? In Mysuru, India, by mulching with forest residual, we have proved that it's possible to grow vegetables after 6 months. I wonder, Mr. Gengai, what has been your experience in Kenya about the deterioration of soil?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Thank you so much for that question. Yeah, the aspect of not using the soil to grow other crops once the tobacco crop has been removed comes in that you find that there's too much use of the fertilizers while growing the tobacco crop. So once you are done with the growing tobacco crop, this land remains to be so much dependent to the fertilizer that if you just plant your other crops on it and just sit there and wait for it to do well as you expect, it cannot work. And you find that the farmers who are doing the tobacco production are not that economically well off, because you find that they are being depleted, they are being used by these tobacco farms because fertilizer they are paying for. The margins of profit are so small. So when you introduce them to other sources of crop farming on the same land that they were using to grow tobacco, you find that it doesn't do well. It doesn't do well. Within 6 months, yes, it can work. But to these our families, to these our community members, they cannot afford to wait for that long because they also have to make a livelihood. They also have to make food from the soils. So that is the aspect of the farms not being readily available to be used for other agricultural activities once they are done with the tobacco farming activities.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Genga. I will take a final question. There are many more, but I'm sorry we have to move on to the second roundtable, and I'll take a final question. This is from Ginny Arnold. Are environmental groups aware of the tobacco impact on environment? We see NGOs like Greenpeace and Extinction Rebellion chaining themselves to transport and oil companies to protect, but never to tobacco companies. Any thoughts about this convergence with environmental groups?
I mean, again, it's a good question. I mean, as we've just been talking about, often the environmental impact of the tobacco industry is overlooked. I mean, I've spent decades working on climate change and the oil industry as well as the tobacco industry, and again, part of today is to raise the awareness of the climate impact, the ecological impact of the tobacco industry, so everyone can start talking about it. When we have scientific studies have shown that the CO2 equivalent from the tobacco industry is equivalent to one big oil company. We need to start talking about the ecological impact of the tobacco industry, and that is part of the reason why we're all here today.
Very good. Thank you very much. So we end the first roundtable, and we're going to the second roundtable. So thank you very much, Dr. Neira, Dr. Blanco, Mr. Rowell, and Mr. Genga. And we're going to the second roundtable. We have now the presentation of 5 case studies related to today's topic. And let's start with Spain. I understand that PMI, Philip Morris International, has attempted to greenwash its image in the Canary Islands. And Ms. Hernandez, what exactly happened there? You are muted. You have to unmute yourself.
Sorry. Okay, do you hear me now? Okay, well, as I say, La Graciosa it's a small, not paved, and energetically self-sufficient island with a high ecological value, and that's why PMI chooses to greenwash its its public imagine, promoting ICOS at the same time. So PMI signs an agreement with the city council in the island, making it seem like it was the city council idea. But in this agreement, PMI covers expenses of the action needed for the island to get the smoke-free culture certification from TÜV Austria. TÜV Austria is the independent certification company, and also their certification fee. So that pay for La Graciosa Sin Humo website, where it explains the goals of the campaign, the steps and action needed to get the certification, we was actually granted to the island with just 4 action. One was an event announcing the campaign to the media, an online survey, the designation of only 4 smoke-free areas in the whole island, taking in mind that 2 of them were already smoke-free by the Spanish tobacco law, and 1 collection of bags on the beach where all the material used had the PMI logo. So once the campaign became public, the whole Spanish tobacco control community raised their voices at once, because it was a breach of Article 5.3 of the FCC. So the commotion was such that the opposition councillors of the City Hall, who had supported the initiative at the beginning, ratified proposing into the end of the agreement, but that was overruled by the mayor and his group, who has the majority. So at this point, it's when No Fumadores, together with the Spanish Committee for Tobacco Prevention and the Catalan Institute of Oncology, which is who collaborated on Center for Tobacco Control, and also with the help of international organizations like ASH and STOP, step in organizing an international sign-on letter addressed to the Spanish government and the mayor of La Graciosa. 151 organizations from 53 countries worldwide signed the letter calling from the break of the agreement and the interruption of the campaign.
Do you know, do we know how much money did the agreement, how much Philip Morris put into the agreement?
No,
do you have any specific?
We haven't been able to figure out. I mean, in the agreement they signed, there's not the amount that, because it was not the City Hall getting the money. They were just paying for the actions to get that certification, and also for the certification to get the fee, you know, the fee that TÜV Austria got to do the certification.
And now that you mentioned this organization, TÜV Austria, that gives this smoke-free culture certificate, what is that? What is the smoke-free culture certificate, and what is TÜV Austria? I know your organization has an interesting exchange of letters with the TÜV Austria.
Yeah, well, it will be really long to explain, but mostly TÜV Austria is a certification company. They do a lot of kind of certifications, but they have this one called smoke-free culture that, well, only PMI has used in different places, like an island in Greece, the La Graciosa in the Canary Island, and some hotels. They use it for hotels and resources like that. So what this smoke-free culture certification means, because you will think that, you know, if someone on somewhere is granted by smoke-free culture certifications, like you're gonna go to an island where no one is smoke, and you know, it's a paradise in that sense. But not actually, the smoke-free culture requirements, smoke-free culture certification requirements talk about that the organization, in this case the island of La Graciosa, will provide information on smoke-free products for those smokers who consciously decide to continue smoking. So when this certification talks about smoke-free, it only refers to burnt tobacco, but not other ways of smoking. Therefore, this certification serves to promote PMI's version of a smoke-free future, which seeks to promote their heated tobacco products that, as we say before, it only has.
So it looks like it doesn't take much to get a smoke-free certificate, so to speak. As you said, there's only one pickup butts in the beach and 2 additional smoke-free environment places. Ms. Gomez Chacon, let me go to you now. And you represent the Ministry of Health of Spain, and I know you have, as ministry, participated in trying to going against this La Graciosa agreement. I understand that your ministry took some actions.
Yes.
Did you get any results? What actions did you do as a ministry, and did you get any results?
Yes, effectively, the Ministry of Health carried out 2 different actions. The first action is the ministry contacted with the Teguise City Council to point it out that this collaboration goes against the Article 5.3 of the WHO.
Let me interrupt you for a second. The Teguise City Council is the one in La Graciosa, is that correct?
Yes, the City Council is the Teguise City Council is the responsible for the Graciosa island.
Sorry,
yes.
Thanks.
Yes, and then the Ministry of Health pointing it out that the collaboration goes against the Article 5.3 of the WHO Convention on Tobacco Control, and also to remind it that the alternatives referred in the protocol are not supported by the scientific evidence and are contrary to the document approved by the ministry and the autonomous regions in Spain. And before the aforementioned requests, the Teguise City Council did not get any answer to the ministry. And after this, the second action, in parallel, the ministry urged the TÜV Austria to remove from the website the erroneous mention of in compliance with the guidelines of the competent Ministry of Health, included in the certificate. And so as a result of this, a bit later, this mention was deleted by the company. And after the ministry action and mailing thanks to the national and international pressure, 3 positive results were got. The first one is that TÜV Austria withdrew in the web the information of alternatives to combustion tobacco products and the erroneous statement. The second one, the mayor of Teguise closed the Graciosa Sin Humo website and ended the agreement with the PNI. And finally, and the most important, success was achieved in the fight against the interference of tobacco industry due to the good cooperation and the joint effort. And this is the main, the summary of the 3 important results.
Obviously, all this has been achieved by the cooperation of the ministry with other groups. What are the main lessons learned? What would you highlight of this collaboration?
Yes, it's a very important lesson learned. And the joint effort in the fight against the interference of tobacco industry is to achieve success. Yes. And so it's very important to be attentive to the greenwashing tactics of the industry and to react to them in an unanimous and forceful way. This is the main lesson learned from this cooperation case of La Graciosa.
Very good. Thank you very much for Ms. Fernandez and Cristina Gomez Chacon for explaining this interesting case in La Graciosa in Spain. I haven't visited La Graciosa, but I heard that it's very, very, very wonderful. And I hope that I will visit this someday without this PMI or greenwashing going on there. Let's move to France, which is also a good destination. Let's talk now to Emmanuelle Beguinot. Ms. Beguinot, under an extended producer responsibility policy, producers are given responsibility for the treatment or disposal of post-consumer products. In tobacco, it's been mentioned that waste is produced in many phases of the production chain, but we're gonna now focus on the post-consumer products. How does it work, EPR in France for the tobacco industry? Can you tell us about what's going on in France?
Yes, Armando, thank you. Actually, France adopted legislation concerning the extending producer responsibility, and it refers to a European directive, which is called the SUP directive, which aim is to reduce the impact of plastic on environment. So this directive doesn't include only tobacco products. You have, for example, plastic bottles as well. But concerning the tobacco products, the purpose is to reduce the number of discarded cigarettes by 40% by 2027. And the principle which has been adopted is that the polluter must pay. And you have different provisions. Among them, the idea is the tobacco industry has to pay cities for the cost of cleaning up cigarette butts. And it is very important to keep in mind that when this text was discussed, the tobacco industry was really against this text and exerted a strong lobby in order to reduce the impact, the scope of this text.
Well, I don't understand. Why would they be against?
Because, of course, you can imagine that they always are against initiative which could lead to reduce their profit and which would lead to reduce the consumption. Well, however, the text was adopted and it is supposed to be transposed by all member states by the 1st January 2023, so next January. And France decided to transpose it earlier. But the problem is that France transposed the text without taking into account the specificities of the tobacco industry, and particularly Article 5.3. And to be very concrete, that means that missions devoted to the producers go much far beyond what is strictly necessary and what should be. And you have, for example, an eco-organization, which is called ALCOM, which gathers all the tobacco manufacturers plus representatives of the tobacco retailers as well, which is in charge of implementing the different measures. And for example, they are in charge of developing information campaign. And as you can imagine, even if in France it's strictly prohibited to make advertising for tobacco, including communication for CSR activities, they will never communicate on the responsibility of the tobacco itself in the development of environment damages due to plastic, because the tobacco industry introduced filter with plastic, not for healthy reasons, but just for marketing reasons, but they are not going to communicate on that. They only transfer the responsibility on smokers, on civility, and that's just an example. And second problem, they are also in the capacity to contract agreements with local authorities so that they are in capacity to develop interactions for the payment for bills in order to pay for the bill to clean cigarette butts. So,
Ms. Biggino, just a question.
Yeah.
If I understood well, the tobacco industry has reacted by proposing these pocket ashtrays. Is that correct?
Yes, they also propose counterproductive measures.
And as one solution, and
exactly.
That is not a solution. Why is that not a solution?
That's not at all a solution because we know, particularly with the scientific evidences, that if you disseminate a pocket ashtray, it will, on the contrary, increase the consumption, and as a consequence, it will also increase waste as well. So we see through that description that the current system must be absolutely amended. And at this level of the civil society, we also launched an alert in order the European Commission, because the European Union is party to the FCTC treaty, so that the European Union Commission disseminates good practice and send an alert so that other member states do not repeat similar mistakes, especially in implementing the EPR system. And the idea is to have a governance with stakeholders who are totally directly and indirectly independent from the tobacco industry. And the idea is to limit the involvement of the tobacco industry to the financial aspect, so that they pay for damages, but through an eco tax, for example, but it would be limited to that contribution.
That's an important lesson for the beginning to solve part of the environmental aspect, although I understand that there's ways to go beyond that and improve even what you have now in France.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Let me, unfortunately, we don't have much time. This is a very interesting topic, at least for myself, but let's jump now to Tanzania so we can keep in time. We have now Dr. Narayanan. You have studied the consequences of reducing the consumption of tobacco in your country. Did you find any positive or negative effects on the economy and the environment? Doctor, are you there? And I can.
Thank you so much, Dr. Peruga. For some reason, I'm not able to start my video.
Okay. There you go.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for having me here. It was wonderful to hear from my co-panelists. I'm with Government of India, but this I did a research on Tanzania about the tobacco consumption and its environmental and economic impact with WHO a few years ago. So I'm just whatever I'm going to talk today is based on that research. So based on our research, we looked at the reduction of tobacco consumption in Tanzania because of FCTC. If FCTC is implemented, what would be the impact on the economy, on the environment, and so on. So in the fundamental reason to do this kind of research is to understand the fears of economic losses when tobacco control happens, because it's always easier to convince the health minister and public health community that tobacco is bad, we have to reduce the consumption. But it has always been difficult to convince the commerce part of the governments.
So what did you find? What did you find in your study?
Yeah. So our study mainly found that if you have a 30% reduction in prevalence, it can actually lead to some reduction in employment and GDP, like 0.5 percentage point reduction in employment and 0.3% reduction in GDP. But there can be a lot of other sectors that can gain, and the losses that I just mentioned can be offset by the health and environmental benefits. So we only focused on the economic aspects here, but the health and environmental benefits can be large. For example, the forest land cover can increase by 0.2%, which can actually boost the exports from forestry sector by 0.8%. So that is one example. Similarly, the emissions, the carbon dioxide emissions can fall by about 0.7%. All over the economy. But if you just look at these sectors, the raw tobacco sector and tobacco product sectors, they can fall much more significantly, like 22% reduction in raw tobacco and 8% in tobacco products. So for basically our findings probably suggest that you have a lot of benefits that can come from reduced tobacco beyond the immediate losses that we can see in terms of employment and GDP. But if you take into account all these other impact of forestry, the reduction in deforestation, which can have its own environmental benefits and economic benefits because of increased contribution of forestry sector and also food sector. If you look at the benefits in the food sector, the increase in the crops, production of crops, and so on. This can be quite significant. The benefit quite significant. So our analysis was based on an economic model. So thanks, Simon, for sharing the link. So this is a paper that we published in British Medical Journal. So those who are interested, you can look into the paper in detail. But this is the
So I'm right if I say that stepping up tobacco control in Tanzania would be a win-win situation. I would say a win-win-win situation. Good for health, good for the economy, and good for the environment. Am I correct?
Yes, absolutely. And one thing that we have to be very clear about is that the immediate negative impact you can see are going to disappear even in the medium term. I'm not even talking about the longer term. Even in the medium term, you're going to get all these benefits. So the economic effects also will be positive. Absolutely.
And have you been able to transmit these results to the government, and what has been the reaction of the government to these results? I see you smiling.
Yeah, no, I mean, the fundamental, as I was beginning the conversation, the fundamental reason for this kind of analysis is to convince the economic part of the government, which in fact in India I'm currently part of. I'm leading trade and commerce. So these are the people to convince. And I did this project for colleagues at WHO, and I think they did mention that they were able to at least impress upon the stakeholders in the government. And I don't know whether it actually led to the implementation of FCTC, but at least some kind of sensitization has been done. And at least we can be happy that the policymakers get a clear perspective on from both sides.
Okay, very good. This is very, very educational, Dr. Narayanan. Let's move on now to Nigeria, wonderful place also. In Nigeria, it seems that litigation has played an important role in protecting the environment. And we have with us today Mr. Olubofemi. And I wonder if you could give us some examples of how this work, this litigation has been important in protecting the environment.
So thanks very much, Dr. Peruga. My background is both environment and very long history of tobacco control. But one of the things I have observed is that, tobacco companies seems to have actually adopted all the strategies of the oil corporations in terms of when they are responding to the harms and the dangers they cause to both the health and our environment, which is basically to distract us and then to evade liability or responsibility. And so for the tobacco companies in Nigeria, I think around the 80s, they came up with something they call Share Planet, Share Solutions. And for that, whatever they have done was to create 4 solutions. They signed agreements with the Nigerian government, they created annual tree planting, they signed MOU with Ministry of Agri. Eventually, when the impact of climate change we could see was affecting livelihood and farming, they signed an MOU with the Meteorological Agency to say simply, we're not contributing to climate change. We will be helping in terms of getting farmers accurate data on weather patterns so that they can farm. Now, the point is, we need to build a strong connection between the climate change movement and the tobacco control movement. All I've heard from this webinar is that we have scientific evidence that the tobacco companies are a major contributor to climate change. So we've got to build an intersection between what we're doing and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. How do we begin to hold them accountable through those instrumentalities of law at the national level, at the local level, and at the international level? We faced this for a very long time in the Niger Delta in Nigeria. And to get through litigation, we've taken Shell, for instance, to court several times. We've taken Chevron to court several times. But most significantly has been the case involving 2 communities of Niger Delta, or Goi and Oroma, a most recent one, against Shell, Royal Dutch Shell in Netherlands, a case that took over 18 years. And for that case, Shell was initially denied liability, which is typical of every company. Then Shell went on a lot of legal rigmarole, and then there was a fine, and then there was an appeal. But earlier this year, an appeal court then ruled that Shell has committed an infraction in the Niger Delta, and they will be paying fines over $100 million to local communities for local fishermen in the Niger Delta. We have also tried to use litigation in tobacco control here in Nigeria. It takes very long time. But I want to say here that the first thing we need to do is to establish that liability framework at both regional and
how did you do that? Establish liability framework?
So what we have today, we have a bundle of scientific evidence that shows that the tobacco companies pollute. How do we use the instrumentality of the UNFCCC to then begin to hold them accountable at the, in areas of environmental pollution? How do we look at our environmental laws, for instance, locally, nationally, about degradation, about pesticide, about the rest of it? We need to begin to test that, hold tobacco companies liable on all fronts. A lot of the time we concentrate on the health impacts of tobacco smoking, which is good, which is fine. But what I'm saying is that we need to expand our liability framework and look at the existing legal instruments are available in our different countries, and I think I heard something like that from France, and then begin to hold them accountable and making them to change their practices and making them reduce what they contribute to climate change.
Have you had any experience with that in terms of expanding that to the tobacco industry in Nigeria, or is it in the works?
Well, that's exactly in the works. In fact, Prior to this webinar, we were supposed to make a visit to where tobacco growing is happening in Nigeria. Unfortunately, security situation in Nigeria made us to terminate that for now. But I can tell you, Dr. Peruga, this is an area we're looking at. We took tobacco companies to court to close to 10 years ago. That case is still in court. This is a strategy that we believe works. It has worked for communities in Niger Delta not to resort to self-help. It has also led to changes of how corporations behave. We think and we strongly believe that we can begin to use that in tobacco control.
Okay, thanks. I think this is a very interesting point. Ms. Beguino already explained what some of this concept applies in the European Union, although limited, but still a step forward. And you, Mr. Olufemi, you really put the finger in the right place when you said that this needs to be expanded into a legal frameworks that can allow that precisely these principles of polluters paying for their pollution principle being in place. So thank you very much. I am pressed by time, and we have a last presentation from Indonesia. Ms. Sugio, we have you from Indonesia.
Yes.
And
Hi, Armando.
hello, how are you?
Fine, thank you. I'm from Indonesia.
Very good. And let me ask you, in your experience, what environmental harm has resulted from the tobacco industry in Indonesia? What is your experience in that area?
Okay, so in my country, in Indonesia, we have a very wide tobacco plantations, and as Kevin have mentioned before on the first roundtable, that it caused on the land degradations, that it's actually really a serious problem to the environment, to the harms of the land. And if I'm not mistaken, it is about 200,000 hectares of land givings allocating for the tobacco plantation for the whole Indonesia. And I think this is also will be going on a very serious environmental defect in the country. And I think also this is not only about the land degradations, but also it's harmful to human health. We already know about the dangers of the secondhand smoking, but more importantly also that in the tobacco plantations, specifically in Indonesia, it is lots of children involved in the workings to the land. So that child labor is often common in Indonesia. That the Human Rights Watch also found that nearly half of the children that is interviewed reported the syndromes of the nicotine poisoning when they are handling the tobacco leaves. It is also known as the green tobacco sickness. So it is also dangerous to people, moreover to the health of the children who are working on the plantations. So this is also a more having a remarkably harmful to the environment, as well as maybe the panelists before also mentions about the cigarette butts that are washed into the environment. This is also happened in Indonesia, that according to Ocean Conservatory's global report on 2021, it is revealed about 20% of the whole pieces of trash found in about 183 kilometers of the coastal line in Indonesia is consisted from tobacco butts. So I think it was the greatest single source of litters by far. And in Indonesia, indoor air pollution is also still a high problem. It is needed for further enforcements on how to enforce the smoke-free law in the country.
Ms. Sugio, how is the tobacco industry? I mean, the damage is serious, as you explained. Is the tobacco industry attempting to greenwash its damage, to present it as something that is not? They're not the culprit for it? What have you seen in Indonesia?
Yes, we have seen in many cases in Indonesia. One of the examples of the tobacco industry in Indonesia, very big tobacco industry in Indonesia, it is Sampurna. They have a program of Sampurna for Indonesia. So within the public, it seems as just from their name of the project, it is really that the tobacco industry become the hero for the country. And they have a scheme of projects called HOPE projects. This is actually a recycling project from the waste conducted by the Sampurna. And not only that, the other tobacco brands in Indonesia, it is called Jarum, also have CSR in Indonesia. They have a program called Trees for Life that doing campaigns through Indonesia to plant about I think 15,000 of trees to reduce the carbon levels in Sumatra. And they also played CSR in temples in Indonesia, because we have lots of temples in Indonesia. They call it temple in Indonesia language is called Candi, and they have a project called Candi Darling. Darling stands for Sadar Lingkungan in Indonesia. This is like an environment awareness in English. So they played again the role of like giving the CSR, planting lots of trees. I think in 267 temples in Indonesia through the 64 districts. And Darlene also working in some of the natural parks in East Java.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we will end the roundtable presentations right now and open the floor for questions. We have been receiving a lot of questions, and I will transmit some of them like before. I don't think we're going to have time for all of them. The participation has been very active, but I have here a first question on the Spain La Graciosa. There's a question that says, La Graciosa, once they received the smoke-free culture certification, was there any change on the island? Was the air quality improved, or were less cigarette butts on the floors?
Well,
perhaps Fernandez?
Yeah, thank you, Armando. No, there were not any changes. The island had a certification granted, but people smoke everywhere. You could see butts everywhere. So as I told you, there were only 4 non-smoking areas. One of them was the cemetery. You could imagine, like, they could have picked like a more better place. So no, there were no change. And as I say, this is a very ecological island. So people could think that they would go to a smoke-free island. And when they got there, the only thing they could see, it was just people smoking butts everywhere.
Okay. I have another question, this for Cristina Gomez from Laurent Hubert. I'll follow up on this question. And he says, could you, Cristina, give us some information on the circular economy law project, which states that the industry will cover cleaning costs when this will enter, and the question is when this will enter into force in Spain. Ms. Beguinot informed us that the member states of the European Union have until January of next year to do so. Do you have any idea of how this is going on in Spain, the transposition of the subdirective and how it's going to be implemented in Spain?
Yes, you refer about the plastic directive, no?
Yeah.
Yes. In Spain, it has been published in the official bulletin last 9 of April of this year, the law that regulate and that transpose the directive of the plastic. And the law entered into force the following day to the publication. So the 10th of April, this law is applicable in Spain. But regarding with the large responsibility for the producer, for the manufacturer, there is established deadline to apply. And this deadline is for the 1 of January of 2023. This is the real deadline.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Let's go to another question. We have here a question from Basant from Mysuru in India. And it says, India is a party to the FCTC, and yet the government of India is extending subsidies to tobacco farmers and easy loans year after year. Is this in line with the WHO FCTC? I wonder if Adriana Blanco is still around to give us some sense of the farmer subsidies are in line with the WHO FCTC.
Thank you, Armando. While, of course, countries are sovereign to apply all the kind of financial stimulus or disincentive that they would like to apply, but still is expected that tobacco is not subsidized in the countries that are party to the FCTC, because this is not part of the core of the treaty that is trying to destimulate the production of tobacco. And really, we need to encourage the countries to go for the implementation of Article 17 and try to provide better options to the growers instead of helping them to stay in a situation that is far from a fair and good situation for anybody.
Dr. Blanco, maybe this goes also to you. We have some frustrated customers here, and they say, the question is not necessarily addressed to you, but say, why beat around the bush? When there's nothing good about tobacco, why not ban cultivation?
Okay, I think that it was not the spirit of the convention at any moment to ban a situation, a product that it was legal and addictive, sorry. Usually we know that just plain bans don't work. Okay, so I think that this is why the convention has not considered a ban of the product, even though it could be, and I am sure, even though I was not in all the IMBs that has been discussed at some moment. I think that we have the tools to make a more, say, sensible transition to the work that we want, and what we need to do is to apply the convention in all its aspects. If we want to go to the moment that we don't need to ban the product, it's just going to disappear because of lack of demand.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Blanco. I have now another question from Laurent Hubert to Akimbode. And the question is, how do we strengthen the link between tobacco control community and the environmental movement? Unfortunately, this is a comment from Hubert. Unfortunately, environmentalists rarely mention tobacco, and the tobacco control community does not engage much in environmental platforms such as FCCC, UNCCD, etc. Akimbode, do you think that engaging more in treaty reporting processes to environmental and human rights treaties would help accountability?
Yeah, thanks very much. Let me say that Lauren is very much correct that not much of the climate change movement mentioned tobacco industry. I think we have to be very deliberate in cutting the big big climate movement coalitions. We know the Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace, climate justice networks across the world. We've got to possibly package our data that are existing, pockets of data connecting tobacco and climate, tobacco and environment, package them. Stop has done one beautiful job. There's going to be the intersessional meeting on climate change in Bonn, I think later this week. There are very important climate change movements or meetings globally, UNFCCC movements, that we should find a way to escalate and put on the agenda the issue of tobacco industry and climate. I think that's what we need to do at this point so that tobacco industry impact on the environment will come onto the agenda of the UNFCCC.
Okay, we have only 2 minutes to go. I'm sorry, and I have a last question of the many I have here. Perhaps this could, it's a more general question, and perhaps I wonder if Dr. Krech could take it. This is a question from Daniel Oba, and says, some countries around the world accept that the tobacco industry is on the board of directors of the Department of Health. What are the advantages and disadvantages of these partnerships? I don't know if any of you, Dr. Krech, would you like to take this question, or anyone else?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. Obviously, there's disadvantages of having this. Right, to be very clear, because tobacco industry will, of course, try to lobby for their interests, say that they're less harmful, that they are socially responsible, that they are environmentally friendly, all of what we have just so very eloquently heard in this excellent webinar today. So we would not advise anybody to have tobacco industry on any of the boards. In WHO, that is an absolute no-go. You cannot be in any meeting with tobacco industry. And so we have a framework of engagement with non-state actors, which prevents us from being in any communication with the tobacco industry. And so we would advise all member states, and specifically all partners to the FCTC, to follow that path. So that's very clear from our side. There is no advantage.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we're going to end here the webinar. It's been 1 hour and a half of very interesting comments. I think if I've taken some lessons learned from this, is that we need to increase our job in raising awareness about the environmental consequences of tobacco, the tobacco industry. I think the public in general is very well aware in general of the bad health consequences in general, but environmental issues are less of, despite the fact that environmental issues are of interest to many in the population, the link between the environmental issues and the tobacco industry are not yet well established in the mind of the public. So I think thanks to your contribution, this has become clear, and I hope we can continue with raising this awareness. That's the first point. The second point I would say is that the intersection between the environmentalists and the health and tobacco communities are, I would say, very weak, to say non-existent sometimes. And I think we have to gain much from each other, not only the environmental movement from the tobacco community, but also the tobacco community, tobacco control community from the environmental movement. And perhaps we need to find these intersections and promote them through whatever means. And this is an area in which we need to think really about how to promote that intersection. And finally, I think more on the legal area, I think been very clear from the presentations that you've done and the case studies that it is necessary in order to hold responsible for the tobacco industry and in general any industry that pollutes, to hold them responsible for that damage to our home, our earth. The legal frameworks need to be developed or improved, and there's been examples, specifically in France, Spain, and the European Union, in which this legal framework has begun to take some shape, but still needs to advance as a nice first step. But I think, as Akimbode was saying, we also need to try that in practice, to have this legal framework applied to the actual actions at the country level. So that would be my 3 lessons, and probably there's many more from you've taken, but I would highlight these 3. And I would like to thank very much the host of this webinar, the WHO, the FCTC, and the Stop Alliance, for having brought this topic to the forefront of our awareness. And to the panelists, obviously, they've been wonderful. They've been very, very articulated. They've been very concrete about what to do and what the problems are. So thank you very much, and hope to see you soon in another of these webinars, hopefully more with presential, physically in front of us, but for now we will be happy to have a virtual webinar this side. So thank you very much, and you all have a very good day.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Armando.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.